Hi, everybody. I just wanted to do a couple of quick announcements before we jump into our episode with Joseph Selbie. And first thing is my newest book that I had been working on called Natural First Aid Essentials for Every Family is finally finished, and it is up to be downloaded on the website. So I'll put a link to that. That's at the inspirehealthpodcast.com, and you can click on books, and from there you can learn a little bit more about it, and you can purchase it right from there. I think this is an incredibly well needed book. For those of you that aren't aware, was when we were away in Mexico for a period of time, I really discovered how essential it was for people to learn how to take care of themselves and their family. And so when I came back, I really jumped in with both feet and put this book together where I take you through what I believe to be kind of six of the biggest areas that we as parents run into and we have concerns around for our kids when it comes to first aid. And not even just for parents, but for every person out there. This is something that we can all benefit with. So we break each chapter down. We look at tummy troubles. We look at cold, flu, and immune support. We talk about how to manage fevers naturally. We look at we look at ear and sinus congestion, bumps, bruises, burns, and scrapes, bites, stings, and rashes. And so I cover all six of these major chapters, and I break down essentially what we do with our kids. I link you to the same kind of products that we use for them. And I really find that this is a really practical book. I think this is something that every single person should have on them. I specifically made this an ebook because I want people to be able to have it on their computer, on their phone, on their tablet. And we also print off a copy, so I have a hard copy. But I think it's really important to have access to it when you need it. Now, check out the book. The link is right there. I think incredibly well received from people that have purchased it already and are able to implement some of the benefits that they're learning about within that book. And I am also turning that book into a very extensive online course that will be live. So we are looking at fine tuning the dates on that, but I think that is going to be early in February next year. And we're going to go 2 weekends. It'll probably be 4 hours each day on a Saturday, Sunday, and 2 weekends in a row. And I'm going to make it very practical. Part of it is people need to have the information and learn about the information, but then we need to practically do it. We need to implement it. We need to gain the confidence and almost like the muscle memory on what to do. So what I take you through is what you need to do. We teach you how to create actually a first aid kit that you need to have on hand and know how to use. And then we actually practically go through a lot of stuff. And we will go into much more depth than what we've done even in the book, obviously, because it's a course and I'll be able to field a lot of questions and you'll benefit from the group dynamic in it. So check that out as well. I think that is under the new section called Inspire Multiversity, kind of our take on university, but we're going to be creating more and more courses to provide information that I think is just really needed and really valuable. Things around first aid, I really do think are super important right now. I learned that firsthand when we were away. So many families that just were out of their zone, out of their comfort zone, didn't know what to do. And as soon as anything came up with either an earache or a sinus problems or a cold or a flu or tummy troubles or diarrhea or food poisoning, whatever it might be, you want to know how to manage so much of that stuff that you can do on your own naturally quite well. And I think as parents, the more that we gain the confidence and know how to do that, our kids are going to pick up on that. And that as part of what actually ignites their natural healing ability. So check that stuff out. I'll have links in the show notes there. And the last thing is, I have been working on this. This is actually while I was putting everything together for the first aid course, and I'm connecting up to some of the different products that we use to manage a lot of stuff. And in the process of that, I'm researching a lot to try and narrow down what I think is really going to be really effective. And I started compounding some specific products that we are putting under our logo of Nature Care Solutions. And so these are two of the main ones that we're starting with right at the moment. And this is called Sinus Shield, and this one is called Throat Shield. And I'm naming these because these are actually really powerful combinations of several different key ingredients to literally create like a protective antimicrobial barrier through the sinus canal as well as through the throat. These are two of the major passageways for pathogens to enter into our body. What I am noticing right now, particularly, and probably a lot of you have, There's a lot of people getting sick right at the moment. This has been a big topic for the past few years. But again, right now, again, very important topic. And I think there's two key things that we really need to be able to do. First, we have to build a more robust immune system. We've got to build up that resilience so we can handle things more effectively. But secondly, we need right now, particularly, I think we need to create a barrier, a protective antimicrobial barrier that will mitigate a lot of the virus or bacterial load that we are exposed to. So, or the pathogenic load. And there's lots of conversation about even viruses and everything at the moment. But either way, what I have found is that if we are creating an antimicrobial barrier using very targeted, well documented ingredients that can be very effective at minimizing the load and killing off 99.9 or 99.99% of the pathogens that we come in contact with, I think right now we need to lower the load and the exposure so that even when we do have some, we're not so completely blown out of the water, that we can actually deal with the load that we are exposed to and start to rebuild our immune system. Because I'm finding right now so many people are susceptible to things. I think strains are changing. And right now, I really do feel like these are super important products to have on hand. Now, being that we are not selling retail, you have to be a patient in order to purchase the products. So I am going to be setting up something like that to make it easier, where we'll probably put out 15-minute consults where people can book a consult and I can explain how to use some of these products and we can put some of the first aid stuff together. But if you're interested in that, send us an email as well. We'll have more information on those products coming up over the next few weeks. But I wanted to make sure that I let everybody know we are putting a lot of information together as far as the book goes, as far as the course goes, and then specific products that we are creating, and in hopes to just really help people learn how to manage this myriad of first aid situations that we often come in contact with and that our kids do, so that we can start to learn to take care of these things on our own as much as we can. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoy this show and I will talk to you soon. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today's guest is Joseph Selbie. And we've been excited to talk to Joseph for a while here. We had a little bit of back and forth, and we finally managed to nail down our time. And Joseph is the author of Physics of God, the Yugas, and Break Through the Limits of the Brain, How Neuroscience Supports Spiritual Experience. That's this book right here. And he's known for creating bridges of understanding between the modern evidence-based discoveries of science and the timeless experience-based discoveries of the mystics. I think this is an area that we really benefit from, especially where we are currently. We always want to understand mentally what's going on when we have these really significant experiences. It always helps us kind of bridge, then is there a method to actually access that again? So Joseph is a dedicated Kriya Yoga meditator for nearly 50 years. He's taught yoga, meditation, and universal experiential spirituality throughout the US and Europe. Joseph, what a pleasure having you on the show today.
Well, my pleasure indeed to be on.
So I've been excited to have a chat with you because we've had lots of conversations around the idea of the superconscious and what sort of lies beyond this sort of five senses of this physical reality. And what I think will be a neat aspect of this conversation is that we're going to tie it into almost like, how do we actually access it, that's almost a little bit more step by step, and what do we need to change from a brain perspective in order to make the connections to actually be able to access these different awarenesses that are there for us, but it just seems like they're almost difficult to get to for the average person. So
Mhm.
Joseph, maybe start off with, from your perspective, what is the superconscious awareness? How do you describe that?
Well, first off, we all have access to it. Superconsciousness is more who we really are than what we experience on a daily basis, which is tied into the senses, it's tied into body awareness, and it ends up being circumscribed by those inputs, where superconscious is beyond that. And superconsciousness is the the area in which saints live. It's the area in which inspiration comes from. It's the area in which intuition comes from. It's who we are, but we've limited it, our awareness, so much that we need to break through those limits in order to experience it again. But it's always there, and it is wonderfully joyful, peaceful, loving, as well as expanding.
So you said that it's actually more than we really are, than what we even experience through the five senses. Can you dive into that a little bit more and help people understand what we mean? How is this outside of what we can sort of taste, touch, feel, see? How is that more real than that, which we tend to think is really the only reality in a lot of ways?
Well, I think one of the ways to understand that question, to answer that question, is to understand that we already are that. We already are that superconscious. And in fact, we have simultaneous awareness of both our physical reality and more subtle realities. And this is a little hard to grasp, that we could have both at the same time, that we could be connected to subtle reality, that we could even be experiencing subtle reality without knowing it. And one of the things I like to share is that according to experiential spiritual teachings, and according to certain disciplines within physics, we simultaneously exist in this higher reality. And it is from this higher reality that we get our thoughts, that we have our emotions, that we recall our memories, that we get our life force. So this expanded reality, this subtle reality, is really more of what we are than the physical body, much more. But we just don't realize that we're having this simultaneous experience. Science tells us, mainstream science tells us that all of those things, consciousness, ideas, memories, emotions, all are produced by the physical brain, where the saints and sages, the mystics, tell us the brain has nothing to do with them, that they come from this subtle reality of which we are always a part. But we don't know it as well as we know the physical body. It's like we're preoccupied with the physical body and begin to feel from an early age that all of our reality is that. We don't realize that we're simultaneously tapped into this much greater reality that's based in superconsciousness.
Mm-hmm. We were talking to another guest a while ago, and this conversation came up around this concept of the greater reality and all the different levels to it, and was saying something very similar, the idea that that's actually much more real. And when you experience it, there's a certain knowingness, a sensation in the body that you can't put aside. And he said, from his perspective, he said a lot of those are more real because they're closer to who we truly are. You're actually connecting more to who you truly are. A lot of times in the physical reality, a lot of what we do is governed for the most part by our preconceived ideas of who we are, and the misconceptions and the misperceptions of who we actually are, often through the ego mind identity. So it's actually a step farther away from the essence of who we really are. And a lot of these other areas, when you connect to them, you're connecting more wholeheartedly to the, I guess, more like the truth of who we really are. So it feels like there's such a strong knowing that connects to that.
Yeah, and you see this or read this in the stories of near-death experiencers, which I find fascinating and really affirming and confirming of the subtle spiritual teachings given to us by saints, sages, and mystics. When they lose touch with their body, which is really what their experience is. On the physical side, the doctors think they've flatlined or in some way are in a deep coma that they're never going to recover from. But on the side of the near-death experiencer, what they realize is they've left the body behind. They left the physical body behind. But by no means have they left themselves behind. And by no means have they left memory and awareness and a sense of their being this new experience. And then it's not like they suddenly became something else. They realized, oh, I've always been this, but never realized the extent, the depth of what it means to be in my subtle self. And they have, for the most part, amazingly wonderful experiences where they feel joy pouring into themselves or love pouring into themselves. And they can immediately understand what it was about the physical body that they identified with, and what about all the rest of their experience, the rest of their reality that they suddenly saw as distinct from the physical. So then when they come back from their near-death experience, there are a couple of things that happen. But one is they never fear death again. They realize that death isn't death. Death is just the dropping of a limited physical awareness and the resumption of an expanded subtle awareness that includes, as you said and I said earlier, most of what they know themselves to be. It's their sense of self, it's conscious awareness, it's ideas, memories, emotions. Those never go away. It's just the physical body that drops. So this is a really dramatic confirmation of what we're talking about. We are already that. We just don't realize it. As I put it in the book, we always have one foot on earth and one foot in heaven. And that is the kind of duality of our existence until we realize that we can go further into the heavenly realm by becoming less and less aware of the physical realm.
Mm-hmm. We have a new series that's going to be coming up after we're done this series, and it's actually going to be called, we haven't released it yet, but it's going to be called Life, Death, and Beyond, Exploring the Greater Reality. I think it's sort of, this series kind of segues nicely into that one. And
Yes.
we've been doing a lot of work, just even reading a lot of near-death experiencers and sort of setting up the interviews for this section. And I really do find it amazing because I mean, when you read their story, I mean, it's so tangible. Like they have such a experience that can't be denied. It's like there's a dramatic shift in consciousness, and then immediately, because of such a shift, they perceive everything in the world from a completely new lens. It's like instant. It's also the world of where you see spontaneous healing often occur. It comes from that sort of, I think, this sort of awareness of a deep inherent truth of who we really are. And much of everything you just talked about is really profound that you'll hear over and over again from these stories. One thing that also comes up a lot of times is that there's an overwhelming sense of oneness that usually these people experience when they have that. Very much the same as like the mystic sages and whatnot that have these experiences, or even like you can experience yourself going through meditation and having these connections. I guess my question is, that is definitely, I mean, when you feel it, you can never really take it away again. It's sort of like there's a sensation in your body that you know a certain level of truth now. Why is that sense of oneness, which is really who we really are, seem to be not as pervasive as the degree of separateness that we usually feel from more of the day to day? And I would say the average person is more connected to a feeling of separation than they are to a connection of oneness. What's the reason for that if that really is more the truth of who we are?
Yeah, I completely understand that question, and I get it a lot. the way I kind of boil it down is if we are all that, if we are one with the infinite, if we are essentially spirit, if we are subtly aware of realms far beyond this one, why the heck don't we know it? Why is it so completely hidden from us? The irony is that we did it to ourselves. That from early on at birth, we start creating neural circuits. And these neural circuits tie together various functions of the brain. So one circuit might trigger the ability to move our hands and legs in harmony so we can walk. Another circuit might tie together visual experience with physical motion, where the two have to be tied together. And these kind of circuits are essential to us, because without them, we couldn't operate the body, if you will. We couldn't function in the world using the body without these circuits. But then we go beyond that. After a short while in childhood, we start building circuits that you might think of as pleasure circuits, not in a sexual way, but that we make connections to foods, to people we love, to experience we have that are joyful to us for some reason or pleasing to us for some reason. And we begin to put those circuits together to enhance those experiences, to bring us those experiences. And we create millions of them. As it's thought of in Indian teachings, we basically create physical structures in the brain that support our likes and dislikes. All of this would be fine if it weren't for the fact that those circuits fire with the least amount of sensory, mental, or emotional stimulation. So if we have a circuit, I often use this example, that what I call the coffee circuit. If you are a coffee drinker and you like the taste of coffee and you like the adrenaline lift you get from coffee, you will form neural circuits in your brain that are all interconnected, that connect memories, that connect feelings, that connect ideas, that connect sensory experiences into a massively active circuit that will trigger and make you want to drink a cup of coffee if any of those related associations occur. So if you have a thought about coffee, you want to drink coffee. If you smell coffee, you want to drink coffee. If you have a memory of a conversation that you had while you were drinking coffee, you'll want to drink coffee. These circuits become compelling. That's the key to understand. And that we have created literally millions of circuits that compel our behavior. And those circuits, unless you're fortunate to be raised in a way that taught you how to create circuits that make you aware of subtle reality, the vast majority of people create circuits that make us aware of physical reality, that make us aware of our sensory experience, our physical experience, and the experience of others, and the ideas that are all tied together, and the memories that are all tied together with our operating in the world. So this compulsion begins when we wake up. Circuits kick in, say, okay, time to get up, and you start doing your morning routine. Okay, now we have to start thinking about work or what we're going to do today. Circuits kick in. And that, again, far more than most of us would like to believe, we're not making any decisions about what we're doing. All those circuits we've created are making the decisions. And it's only when we really stop take time to consider what it is we want to do, what is it that we would like to be doing, perhaps to offset the fact that the various circuits that fire automatically, we begin to perceive them as not healthy for us. Maybe they include poor diet, lack of exercise, bad relationships, poor work productivity. All of those become habitual. And if we finally sort of say, no, wait, stop. This is not who I want to be. And until we really say, okay, I am going to deliberately go in a direction I don't normally go. Until we do that, we are much more automatic in our behavior than is comfortable to realize. And it's this automatic behavior that just, it's not that it makes higher awareness impossible. It just means we don't even think about higher experience. We're just pulled along by all these preset experiences that we don't even bother. So then we come to how do we rewire? How do we create new circuits that will, in fact, support reaching out to higher experience? And this is as possible as anything else we do. Mm-hmm. We already wired our brains. And wiring our brains to create all these circuits is just as possible now as it was when we were infants. Nothing has changed. The brain is always plastic. But now we have to be more deliberate about what it is we want to do in order to rewire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot said in that. It's the cycle that we get into, this sort of dislikes and likes. Is this basically the same as when we talk about that pleasure pain cycle that a lot of the mystics have talked about over the years, and how we get stuck very much in seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, and we just kind of stay in the same cycle of sort of, that comfort zone that then we don't really challenge too much. You also kind of talked about then um, what happens when we challenge these. So I think that's a really important part, because what often, at least I find, is that in my own experience too, when I have challenged those things, it's not always met with complete ease and relaxation. Usually it brings up a lot of stuff for people. So, which sometimes I think people interpret as this is maybe not a good thing for me, because it steps out of that comfort zone, it steps out of that familiarity. And by nature, when you challenge those circuits, it's going to bring up a lot of stuff. I'm wondering if you can maybe share what that experience can be like when we do start that process, and what maybe people can expect that it could feel like, so that they can kind of keep the pace, they can keep moving forward with it despite what it actually feels like in their body.
Yes. Well, the first thing I always say is do one thing at a time. If you want to, as you say, challenge those circuits, which means, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're trying to resist this automatic flow of reactions. And when you try to resist it, you find it's pretty powerful. That, if you do have a coffee circuit and you say, I'm going to give up coffee. Well, one of the first things that happens is you start wanting that cup of coffee. And then 10 minutes later, you want that cup of coffee. And 2 minutes later, you want that coffee. It's very, very deeply embedded, and it's very strong because it brings our attention to it. So as you say, when you challenge the circuits, you're really up against this habitual flow of your life force to go through these circuits. So that's why I say the first thing that I advise is to just try to make one change. And more importantly, try to make the one change that will have the most payoff for you, that will create the most change in your experience. And the one change that I always universally recommend is that people establish a meditation habit. If you don't already have one, it can be the single most important thing in your life. And the reason is that a lot of people think of meditation as, oh, okay, I sit down and I'm quiet and I relax. And that's true, but it's just the surface of what it means to meditate. What it really means to meditate is that you're plugging into that more subtle reality and you're experiencing it. So when you feel peace, you might go, oh, yeah, I relaxed a little bit and that was great. But really what you felt was superconscious peace. And if you maximize that rather than minimize that and keep having those experiences during meditation, your brain will rewire primarily in the prefrontal cortex. It will create neural circuits that not only support the physical process of meditation, but it will also create circuits that respond to and support that feeling of peace and that superconscious awareness. So meditation is so important to self-transformation because it connects you into the highest aspects of who you are. And it does so by minimizing your awareness of the physical body. So when you meditate, you sit still. And as you sit still, the literal connections, the wires from the muscles and the body stop sending so many signals to the brain. And your brain becomes less and less bombarded by sensory input. It is, of course, easier said than done. Anybody who's sat down to meditate finds almost immediately that you're a bit squirmy and you don't want to sit still. And the body wants to keep sending you signals that tell you this body needs this or wants this or needs to relax or is breathing or whatever. And all of those sensory inputs tend to make your mind start churning with thoughts, and one thought leads to another. So that train of thought that tends to happen when you meditate is often amplified by any kind of emotional charge you have around such thoughts. So all this conspires to make meditation challenging because you're challenging your circuits, as you say. You're challenging all those automatic responses that you tend to have, particularly the emotional ones. And a lot of people will, unfortunately, and I always hate it when I hear this, make a person conclude that I'm just not the kind of person who meditates. And what I say in response is, well, if you went to play tennis and you'd never played tennis before, would you expect to hold your own with Rafa Nadal? You know, is there anything in your experience that you can do now that you didn't have to go through a learning curve to do it? Meditation is no different. And in the same way that it might have been difficult to learn to play tennis well, it's difficult for the same reason, that you didn't have the circuits, or you had circuits that were fighting the tendencies you were having while you were playing tennis. So there's a certain amount of overcoming the way we've wired our brain already in any new thing we set out to do. So meditation is no different. But the payoff of meditation is far greater than the payoff of learning to play tennis, if you've never played tennis, because it gives us access to the superconscious. It gives access to more of what we really are. And then that kind of seeps into everything we do.
Yeah.
Every feeling we have, every thought we have, the level of life force that we experience, all are uplifted. They're all transformed gently, slowly over time until we naturally live more from that higher superconscious state than from the normal conscious state.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. I really like when you had mentioned that it is minimizing the awareness of the physical body. It reminds me, and I would completely agree with you, and that's come up many times, is that really the best path to what we're talking about is through meditation, because you really do need to develop this. It's literally like a skill again that we're trying to relearn. And we live in the society where everything really we want it now and we want it immediately, and it's like you said, there's a learning curve with all of this stuff. You really do have to sit down and just build those circuits up so that they know what to do better. It's like, if people have ever even experimented with something like fasting, I went through almost a very similar experience doing fasting. My wife and I been practicing in this in different ways, and we did a 7 and a 9 day fast, just water fast. And not that that's even that long, but for the average person, that's still a pretty good chunk of time. A lot of people think
Yeah.
you're going to die if you don't have something to eat within a few days.
Yeah.
um, and you go through, you very tangibly experience grappling with the physical body, because you really are putting less physicality in and less focus on the physical body. Because I mean, food and substance is a big piece of our connection with the physical body. So when you
Yeah.
let go of all of that and it's not there, I mean, there's a lot of addiction and itchiness and stuff that then that you get entangled with, that gradually starts to fall away, and eventually it really does feel like it drops, and it no longer has the same tethering to you in the way that it once did. And then from that place, you have a completely different relationship with things. You feel like you're actually making more choices from a place of inner authority than sort of this autopilotness that takes place, where you are just
Yeah.
going about your business, doing things that seem just normal, but you're kind of a step away from actually really choosing things.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's no substitute for direct experience. So when, speaking for myself, I've also often fasted, and not always for 9 days, but 3 day fasts, 1 day fasts even. And I think one of the things that I always experience is that I have a lift of energy. And logic would say that if you don't have food, you should have a diminution of energy, because the sort of mainstream viewpoint of how bodies work is that food is fuel. And if you don't have fuel, the body won't perform as well. But when you fast, and especially when you fast lengthily, like you mentioned, for 9 days, you realize, wow, I really don't need food. Uh, the energy that is pouring through me, and in fact, the energy that is much greater than before I fasted, that is
Mhm.
pouring through me, clearly has another origin than food. And I think
Yeah.
in fasting, in a small but significant way, we prove to ourselves that we're more than a physical body. There's some other reality of which we are a part, and the physical is only a small piece of that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what you kind of have this tangible experience of at some point with it, where you realize you're actually not hungry anymore. You don't even really care too much about food. Um, and you've actually got this, for me, it hit like after maybe day 4. I think I struggled with a lot of stuff, especially up until day 3, and then it started to get, all of a sudden, it got looser. And what it felt like was actually realizing that there's many different ways that we are nourishing our bodies that we just may not be aware of, or that aren't even online so much when we are very much engrossed in nourishing from a physical capacity. So when you don't have food, all of a sudden you realize, whatever it's coming from, whether it's the sun, whether your chakras are receiving energy in a certain way, and you're fueling yourself from this, or negative ions, whatever it might be, something is going on that you are actually fueling yourself, but in a totally different system. And to me, it reminds me of this sort of super conscious awareness, because you kind of tap into something that is quite different than what we've only really known.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think meditation, you do this, the same sort of process happens with that.
Yeah. And until you have that direct experience, it's only an intellectual belief in higher consciousness or more subtle reality. And it's important that you have that, because that's a starting point, but it shouldn't be an ending point for any of us. We should dive into the actual experience of this higher consciousness.
Hmm.
And as I started there a few conversations back, I highly recommend the first place you start is meditation, because it subtly changes you in many ways. But take the time to really establish that practice. Don't meditate for a week and think, wow, that was good. I liked that. And then get carried away by something else. Really be deliberate about making new circuits. It's a weird way to think about yourself, but it takes weeks to months for the brain to create strong, interconnected circuits that support behavior and make that behavior. And this is the thing to understand, is that you want to make that behavior almost automatic.
Hmm.
I've been meditating for so long that it is really hard for me not to meditate in the morning. If I have a really early flight, and it will mean getting up at 2 o'clock to meditate, I will get up at 2 o'clock to meditate, because I really want to. And all those circuits that I've built up over all those years are firing away, and they're supporting in my mind. It's calling up the feeling, it's calling up the memories, it's calling up the thoughts surrounding meditation. It makes me want to meditate. So it takes a while for circuits to become the default behavior. And that's what you really want meditation to become. You want it to be the default behavior, not just something you know how to do, something you do occasionally, but that it becomes a powerful part of your daily life. And that does take weeks to months. So be prepared when you take on any new habit. And I'm talking a lot about meditation because it's the central habit that I think everyone should have. But realize it's going to take a while, and that you're going to encounter resistance. Your mind is going to start telling you, oh, you're just not the kind of person who meditates, or I just can't get my thoughts to calm down, or I'm never going to learn to sit still. All these voices come up, and they do so for everyone. But you just need to push through. And there will be magical moments. I can almost guarantee there will be magical moments. It's not all grim business. There will be moments, and sometimes longer than moments, where you get it. You go, oh, that felt wonderful. I felt myself connect to something much greater. And if you're prayerful, praying to God, you might feel just a big wave of response from the divine filling your heart and mind. And those moments are very powerful. The more you meditate, the more of those moments you have.
Yeah, I think that really is one of the most powerful things you can do. My wife has done, she was quite a seasoned meditator when I had met her too, and had done many rounds of 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreats. And I mean, those are
Mhm.
pretty intense when you've never done those before. Not to say
Yeah.
that's what you need to start with, but I mean, she had, just a spontaneous healing of her vision after the first one she did. She had glasses and came out and no longer needed glasses. Her eyes cleared right up and done. And since then, has still never required them. So I mean, it really is, like you had mentioned, miraculous. There, you tap into stuff where miracles take place. So if we're not sort of connecting to that place, we're not so privy to receiving miracles. But I think if we can connect to that place, we sort of open up more of the potential for that those realities to actually happen. And so I think that's part of where this magic happens. Outside of, I think, just being able to navigate your life better. You know,
Yes.
like you're operating from a place that I think ultimately is more in your highest good and more truthful than a lot of times the ego mind identity sort of conditioned self. That's not always got our highest good in the viewpoint, right? Where so when we connect to this other place, I think we are guided in a different way. And like you had mentioned earlier, we connect to some of the things like intuitions, the which I think is really higher levels of information that goes beyond the linear logical thinking mind.
Yes. I think underlying everything that you just said, and the most significant experiential impact of meditation, is that you feel better. You feel emotionally better. And we are, for the most part, strongly driven by our emotions. And the reason we tend to react in the protecting the ego mode is that we're not feeling enough just being safe in ourselves. We feel like we need to have whatever that was being threatened, and we go after it. And it can be different for everybody what that thing is that might be threatened. But the key to understand it is the feeling threatened is what drives our behavior. Where if you're feeling satisfied, if you're feeling fulfilled, if you're feeling complete, if you're feeling at peace, you just respond to everything differently. You're much more able, even if intellectually you thought that you should forgive those who trespass against you, when you're feeling that inner fulfillment, it's just natural to forgive those who are making our life difficult or threatening, things we want to accomplish. They just become the things we have to deal with in life, but not threatening the purpose of our life.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point because what what you were talking about safety, because I do think that's like I mean, that's really what constantly triggers that whole fight or flight system and then puts us kind of right into autopilot on protective mode, which is very biologically wired in. Um, what I love about it is it's like when connecting to that, you do sort of find this sense of inner safety that you take with you everywhere. And then what also happens is you're not constantly then looking for something outside yourself to provide that safety. So yeah, I think that's really, really important because without that inner feeling of safety, I feel what happens is it's inevitable that we will constantly put the solution outside of ourselves onto something else, and that keeps us in a cycle of constantly going in a loop of feeling protected, being scared, feeling protected, being scared. Whereas if you've got that inside yourself, everywhere you go, you emanate that out, and like you said, you will interact with everything differently because you have this profound sense of safety and security within yourself.
You're already okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
You're
beautiful.
already you're already fine. Now, a lot of people, I think, kind of fear that state because they think it will make them um, placid or non-responsive or uninteresting. And that, as a friend once said to me, what you're describing to me sounds like being a contented cow in the pasture. But the reality is that when you have positive, harmonious emotions, they make you much more creative and much more productive and much more able, because you're not getting in your own way. You're not busily emotionally reactive in negative ways to the inevitable things you have to work through to live a dynamic life. But if you don't react to all those, it's like you are given 90% of your energy back.
Yes.
90% of your energy is all snarled up in these emotions you have about liking or disliking how your life is going. But if you can be, in fact, more centered in that feeling of safety and joy and positivity, you become a juggernaut. One of the common things about successful men and women is that they don't react emotionally to most of what's going on in their lives. They just cruise through it. It's just one more thing they need to do, not in a grim way, but it's just, that's the way life is. And to become super creative, super productive, super successful, even super loving, you need to let go of all those unwanted negative feelings that otherwise will hamper you forever. And that's what meditation does. It doesn't just make you placid, it makes you dynamic, because it gives you all that energy back that you're wasting in these negative experiences. And the way you get them is just, immersing yourself in them, in the superconscious. It is our natural state to feel loving, positive, energized, joyful. That's who we really are. And so when we tap into that in meditation, we bring that back into everything that we do and with everyone we do it.
Yeah. Well, and I find that it doesn't I totally understand what your friend was saying with that. I've heard very similar kind of ideas, but it's not the reality what it feels like. I find even personally being on this path for the past probably 15 years or more, and I still find you have a wide spectrum of the array of emotional scale. I mean, it's not like you don't experience anger or frustration or things, but I find that the attachment to it is so much thinner than what it's
Right.
like. And so I'm not tethering myself to that and then ruminating and lamenting. And it reminds me of like the Buddha's, second arrow, the suffering that we kind of do to ourself, where we by ruminating and sort of staying in the cycle of it. I feel like that part of it kind of disappears. It's not like, if someone that you have a hard breakup or you have someone that you love that passes away, it's not that you don't feel often the full intensity of that emotion, but it it doesn't settle in the same way. There's not the same sort of rumination process I find around that stuff in the same degree. Is that kind of your experience with it?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good insight. It's not black or white. You don't suddenly find yourself in a state of consciousness in one day in meditation, one particular day, and then you're done with it all. You're two things are happening. One is that life goes up and down. It just does. It
Yeah.
goes up and down. The other thing is that you still have all those circuits that you created that tended to make you, want things or want things in a certain way. And they have a life. And so they will give you flashes of anger, which is much more quickly offset by the feeling of being safe and being at peace and being in, a joy, a happiness that endures. But those other things will happen from time to time. And I think, as you say, the key is to just say, oh, that happened. I just got angry with somebody, but I'd much rather live in this other state of being. And I'm just going to relax back into it. And I'm going to let go of that And the more we do that, the more those circuits become quiescent. And they don't really go away. It's a big mistake to think rewiring the brain is like directly tackling all the circuits that you don't like. It's really create new circuits, create strong new circuits so they become the default response in your life. And when you do that, the circuits that automatically generated unwanted experience just become less and less easy to be triggered until they're rarely, if ever, triggered in
Yeah.
your life. But
Yeah.
the key
And
is you got to build the new circuits. You don't have the new circuits, the old circuits are just going to keep firing, and you're going to fall into those behaviors, even if you really don't want those behaviors.
yeah. Yeah. Just the autopilotness of it. I love when you talked about having 90% of your energy back too, because that's such an important part too. I mean, so many people want to make changes in their life, but it's almost impossible when so much of your energy is being put out to things that ultimately is not going to allow you to make those changes. So when you're able to pull that back, I mean, that's your power. That puts your power back into you. Now you can take that and move your whole life in a different direction from it. So it's setting you up to be able to make often the changes that we, intellectually or emotionally know that we want to be able to make, but seem to can't do because we keep getting stuck in the same patterns over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
it's a real battle, and it's a real problem. Uh, People who suffer from addiction or have strong patterns from dysfunctional families or some kind of emotional trauma, my heart goes out to them, because those circuits are super strong.
mhm,
And but it's still the same process, is that somewhere in your being, even if you have all that to deal with, you still have to decide, I can change. I can establish new circuits, establish new habits. I can actually start to experience things that I don't automatically experience now. And you may need help. You may need therapists. You may need friends. But it begins with you. If you're fortunate enough to not be dealing with a whole raft of unwanted automatic negative behaviors, and that you're just kind of not the person you want to be, then it's far easier to make those changes. And I was fortunate that, I had a good childhood, good upbringing. I found positive experiences early in my adult life that allowed me to shape a lot of new positive behaviors. But I had negative behaviors that bedeviled me for decades. And I think that I want people to be realistic about what it means to try to tap into the superconscious. You've got a lot of things that are trying to keep you out of the superconscious, and that you need to be realistic and deal with them. That's why I say start with one, get your meditation habit started, and then start looking next, what else could I do that would give me a lot of payoff for the energy it takes to create another new circuit, another new strong habit. And it can be a lot of things. It might be learning how to be more creative in your work. It might be taking on a particular emotional pattern by substituting a positive sort of antidote emotional state for that one. A lot of times it's difficult to meditate because the same negative emotion just keeps taking you away, or it invades your meditation. You stew, you stew in your meditation about wrongs that were happened to you or losses you experienced in your life. It becomes instead of a time to transcend, it becomes a time to just examine that negative emotion in more detail. Can be a very real problem. And so you need to introspect, take the time to really understand your own emotional makeup. It's not something that is natural to us. We have emotions and we experience emotions, but we tend to think of them as ephemeral. They come and they go. And we don't look for their roots in us. We don't look for the patterns that stimulate them in us. And introspection is a very powerful tool to understand them. It isn't the tool to overcome them, but understanding is the first step. If you have powerful negative emotions that kick you into behavior patterns that you don't want. If you don't have those, meditate more, and then meditate more than that. Because through meditation, it awakens all the positive emotions that you want to have, and the negative emotions gradually fade away. But if you have a negative emotion that's keeping you from meditating, then introspect, tune into it, come up with affirmations that will mitigate against it, militate against it, create positive habits that, just keep your mind from it, exercise, productivity. But you may have to deal directly with a strong negative emotion by creating a strong positive emotion that is the antidote.
Mm-hmm. Is there a proper way to meditate, Joseph? I know there's like lots of different methods out there. From your perspective, in order for this purpose to sort of really be able to connect to these subtle energetic realms or this superconscious awareness, what have you found to be, as far as sort of literally like a step by step for people? How can they begin the process to be able to set it up to tap into this type of thing?
Well, I think that any meditation technique that works for you is a great meditation technique. Because for some reason, you have found it to be effective and you learn to use it and make it effective for yourself. You may find that after a while, you don't feel like that meditation technique is taking you as deep as you would like to go. And that could be a reason to try another meditation technique. I would say very generally that meditation techniques where you primarily just watch thoughts come and watch thoughts go are a good foundation, but that there are techniques that will take you deeper. The techniques that will take you deeper often involve watching the breath, and then eventually techniques that involve using the breath, pranayama techniques, can take you the deepest. And the reason why pranayama techniques are so effective in meditation, and Kriya Yoga, as you mentioned, something that I've been practicing for almost 50 years, is a pranayama technique. And I can't teach it to people because it really requires that you do a lot of other techniques before you learn to do those before you do Kriya. So it wouldn't be effective for you if I just told you how to do it right now. But the key to it is that by doing deep, controlled, focused breathing, you bring your life force into the core of your being, and it automatically makes you sit more still. Your breathing slows down, heart rate slows down, and in that deeper and deeper and deeper stillness, you feel spirit, you feel your superconscious self much more completely and for longer. That's perhaps the best part of it is that you can stay in that deep communion, that deep connection to spirit for longer and longer periods of time.
Hmm. Joseph, you said something earlier around creating circuits for subtle reality, and it makes me think of our kids because I've got 5 and a 6-year-old, and it's like they're very much naturally their default mechanism, I believe, is connected to that. I mean, we go to the forest, and they'll talk to trees, and I mean, it's very much their default. I think they naturally are connected to lots of different realities. Um, how would you support those types of circuits for children, for parents that have kids that want to not have to have them then retrain everything to go back to that state that they're already connected to as kids naturally, I think. So, what would be some practices for parents out there in order to really foster those types of circuits from early on with our kids? Because I feel like those are so beneficial, and I ultimately feel like for them to be play the part of sort of continually each generation reshapes the world in different ways. I feel like a deep connection to that from early on is going to create the most profound changes that can take place in the entire planet too.
A great question, and I know of people who have a depth of knowledge in this department, but I don't. But I would say in general that kids are far more open to positive experiences that come through sitting still or being quiet in nature or absorbing nature than most people would realize. A lot of children are happy to meditate. They just have to be taught a way to do it that has a clear experiential payback. There are some techniques that are just, they're just fighting to move. That's really what they want to do. And there are ways to, through guided imagery, through tapping into their tendency to want to move to begin with, and sort of guiding that slowly into being more and more still. I have a good friend, Joseph Cornell, who wrote Sharing Nature with Children, and it's full of activities you can do with children or adults. I've done almost all of his activities, and I love them. So it brings out the child in us all. But it's a great way for kids to not just be out in nature, running around, throwing things, and enjoying that aspect of nature, but also to get them into a more subtle connection to nature. And he has a whole bunch of exercises, but one of the things that I've seen him do with kids is he'll start with the more active exercises, and he'll gradually bring them down to the ones where they sit more and more still. So there's an art to it that I don't have, but I have seen it in operation. I'm part of a spiritual community called Ananda. We have an entire school system, both here, the community that I live in, other communities that Ananda have started. That's called the Living Wisdom System, or the Education for Life system. And it touches on this too. How do you get kids' natural exuberance to include a natural awareness of spirit? And how do you teach it to them when they're young? Because you can't lecture them like I would lecture an adult trying to teach them how to meditate. They really have a whole language that they understand, and an approach to that you can give them. So I wholeheartedly encourage all parents to include this kind of experience for their kids, because it'll stay with their kids forever. It'll build circuits that stay with their kids forever.
Yeah.
But it is an art. You can't easily approach young children like you would approach an adult and expect them to, one, understand it, two, like it, and three, most importantly, to have the kind of inner experience that will make them want to come back for more. So that's the
Um,
longest non-answer I could possibly give you.
no, I think that was good. I think also that book, Sharing Nature with Children by Joseph Cornell.
Cornell.
Cornell, I'll put a link to that too, because that definitely could be a good one for people to check out. I also think too, it's like kids will naturally kind of, we were working with this shaman for a while, and he would talk about that ultimately you're really wanting to see the sacredness in all things again. That's kind of the essence of it. And when you're in nature, and I think it's a lot easier, especially early on. I think
Yeah.
if you're there, you naturally see the sacredness in all things. And from my experience with it with our kids too, is that if our kids have just seen us as parents in nature and appreciating the sacredness in all things, it becomes part of their default just through the experience of seeing how we interact with it. And then that becomes part of normal for them, right? So I think too, for parents out there, doing, if that's something that appeals to you, then you do that, and then also your
Yeah.
kids will kind of naturally pick up on that. But I mean, the other part of it too, I think, is you have to be careful nowadays too with the degree of technology early on, I think, because that very quickly captures their attention, and it can make it hard for them to appreciate sometimes even nature and stuff in the same capacity if it's, because some of this stuff is really powerful as far as capturing your attention. So those are things that I know have helped us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's a big challenge nowadays. Screens are
yeah,
a big challenge for parents because, you know, as adults, many adults just move from one screen to the other through the day and back and forth, and that they're constantly interacting with a screen. So, as the old saying, monkey see, monkey do, kids want to do whatever the adults are doing. So, a lot of parents have to make the choice to not be so screen oriented themselves, or at least to have timeout periods that are lengthy.
yeah. I think that's
And
more doable for a lot, is to have just planned times where there's none of them. And then if you can get outside and do something in nature and let them have your full attention there, really be present with them. It goes a long ways, and it doesn't even have to be all the time, but like pieces of that, of I think strong presence and connection can really fire up some of those circuits too. So
yeah. And as you say, if you're out there with them having fun, it's a powerful thing rather than just, go go out there and play, Johnny. I was fortunate that our kids, we raised 4 kids, were grown and gone before the ubiquity of screens took place. And I know it would have been a lot more challenging for us to raise kids. So you just have to be more deliberate. And, kids will fight you. They will want to do those things that they see. So you have to make it really fun. You have to offset that with making what the circuits you want to inspire in them to make that whole process attractive. It doesn't have to be fun, ha ha, funny. It just has to be satisfying.
yeah, yeah. And I find a lot of times like what kids really crave is the really deep kind of presence, one-on-one kind of, not even one-on-one, but just that you're there, I know
Yeah,
like with our kids, it's like if we are doing board game night, which we usually play cards or board games at some point, usually in the evening, and it's like they really look forward to it because we're all sitting down, we're all there.
right,
There's nothing else sort of, you're there and taking your attention away and doing this. You can't do that. You kind of, they'll get really upset if that is happening, and they'll tell you very quickly that that doesn't work for them. So
right,
um,
right.
just sort of an aside there for parents to kind of play with, but experiment with it and see. And if you start early on, it's a lot easier because that becomes their norm. If it goes for too long, then they're going to fight you around. They're going to want to have their time with their screen but try and work it as best you can. Joseph, where can people learn more about the work that you're doing? Where can they pick up this book along with your other amazing books that you've got too? where can we send people to get all of that information?
Well, I have a website that is just simply around my name. So it's josephselbie.com. Now, Selbie is spelled somewhat unusually. It's Selbie rather than Selby, which is the more common spelling of Selbie. So Joseph Selbie, spelled with an IE.com. You can learn more about all my books. There are first chapters of all the books if you want to go sample them. All of the books you can purchase through Amazon, and all of those books also have Kindle and Audible versions. A lot of people enjoy listening to books more and more and more. So they're all available in Audible format. There's also articles there on the site. There's a how to meditate section where I teach what's called the hung saw technique, which is one of the ones that I was saying is more about watching the breath. And then just links to lots of interviews like this one that I have had over the years.
Oh, wonderful. I will have links to those as well. It's actually funny that you even mentioned the hum saw technique. When we were first going through the different guests for this series, and we came across your work too. We had just finished interviewing another person named Guy Needler, and we were reading a bunch of his books. And he does a satsang in the evenings on his YouTube channel, and he was doing that exercise. We were just participating in it the other day, and we were doing that specific exercise. And then my wife takes your book and she just opened it up and she goes right to the section on where you were talking about that specific meditation technique. And we just kind of laughed and going, that's going to be a really good adjunct to the group of lineup that we had for this series. So Joseph, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for all of your amazing insights on this. I think this will be really valuable for people.
Thank you very much for having me.